Hello there and welcome to Nerd.World Films and the latest Nerd Talks episode, this time continuing the Star Trek franchise series with the 10th installment, Star Trek Nemesis. This film from the early 2000s was the final one of the Next Generation era movies, and the final appearance of the USS Enterprise NCC 1701E. The Federation battlecruiser type Sovereign class starship that replaced the Galaxy class Enterprise D that was destroyed in Star Trek Generations. This film would see the return of all the primary cast of the Next Generation into their most iconic and beloved roles in the Star Trek franchise. Before we get started, please like, share, subscribe, and check out my other channels that are listed in the description below: Nerd.World, Nerd.World History, and a new one, Nerd.World Order, that is still very much in development. I've also recently started a website that is located down below. Please check that out. Again, it's going to have more things on it available soon, but at the moment it's, again, still in its infancy, but please check it out. With all that said, let's get into Star Trek Nemesis. Star Trek Nemesis follows once again the adventures of the crew of the USS Enterprise D. The film starts off with a little excursion to try to find a mysterious positronic signature emanating from a planet eerily and uncomfortably close to Romulan territory. On this world, after a little bit of a confrontation with the locals and the introduction of what is one of the more cool ships, I think, in the Star Trek franchise, one of the shuttles, which also includes the Argo little vehicle, which on my other channels, both on this one and on my main one, Nerd.World, there are linked videos for which cover the shuttle and the ground vehicle in my movies vehicle series on this channel, which I'll try to remember to link down below, but I will forget. But you'll find it on the channel if you look in the movie vehicles playlist. After managing to recover the positronic body of a more primitive Soong type android than Commander Data, they find that B4, imaginatively titled, although I always wondered, as much as that is a creative title, it's almost like a hindsight one. Did Dr. Soong really know that this was not going to be the final version of his creation? Was B4 never intended to be fully self-aware and was always called B4 because he was always the advanced prototype of lore and later Data? Or was this just a good name given by the production team, which is what I think it was? Anyway, skipping a little ahead, we've seen the assassination of the Romulan Senate, and we know that there is trouble on Romulus and that the Star Empire is devolving into turmoil. The Federation learns that the new Praetor of the Romulan Star Empire is not a Romulan, but is in fact a Reman, and depending on which sources you look at, the Reman are either another Vulcan subspecies similar to the Romulans, or are a completely alien subjugated species that happen to cohabit in the same system but already lived there when the Romulans, or rather the ancient Vulcans, turned up, and they were the first race conquered by what would become the Romulan Empire. It's up to you which one you believe. I personally always favoured the idea that they were a Romulan subspecies, and I've read quite a few different versions of those events, including the fact that they were actually Vulcans who were exiled to that planet as slaves by their own people, as in those early Romulans, and later would become the Reman through a process of natural selection. Others were a series of Vulcans who were exposed to a fungal-like organism which lived on the surface of the planet, which mutated their bodies and adapted them to the harsh environments of the planet of Remus. Whichever story you believe, the Reman are a subjugated people, and it is unlikely that one of them would have become the Praetor of the Romulan Empire. But one of them has managed it, and this Reman wants peace with the Federation, and he has requested the Enterprise in the presence of Captain Jean-Luc Picard in order to facilitate better and improved relations between the two states. The Enterprise would be dispatched to Romulus immediately, where it would be left waiting in orbit for nearly a day before eventually, after attempts to hail the surface were unheeded, a vessel would decloak in front of the ship. This enormous predatory starship was called the Scimitar and was the flagship of the Remans, and of course now by proxy the Romulans. Although the Romulan Imperial Navy was still very much intact and thriving, the Scimitar was a vastly superior ship with advanced technology possibly derived from Borg or Dominion sources. The Scimitar was a gigantic ship, heavily armed with disruptor banks, torpedo launchers, and an advanced cloaking device, as well as a Thaleron weapon of mass destruction, which we'll get to in a little bit. Upon being invited aboard the ship by the Viceroy to Shinzon, who they mistakenly believed was Shinzon initially, they would learn that Shinzon was not even Reman, not Romulan, but actually human, a race the Romulans hate even more than the Remans, making it increasingly unlikely this man would ever become Praetor. But he had managed it through cunning, skill, ruthlessness, and quite frankly killing all of his rivals, and had typical Romulan fashion, complicit traitors within the government and within the military who supported him and his rise to power. Shinzon would also be a clone of Captain Picard, which is something Picard would realize instantly upon looking on the young face of Tom Hardy. I mean, the young Jean-Luc Picard in front of him. Not quite the face he remembered, as they had broken his nose, his jaw, and he hadn't quite grown up into the man that Picard remembered himself once being. And of course, he still had a functional heart. But this still begged the question as to why. They would quickly learn through meetings with Picard that he was a clone created by the Romulans in a previous regime who they intended to replace Picard with. But fears that he would be caught meant that he was exiled to the mines on Remus, where they expected him to simply die. But the man that would become his viceroy took him in, raised him like his own son, sheltered him and protected him and trained him. And the two of them then rose to the ultimate power within the Romulan Star Empire. Good choice by him to pick up that kid then, wasn't it? Now, at the moment, Picard doesn't see the ulterior motives, but however, he is suspicious that there is one. Shinzon doesn't exactly come across as particularly trustworthy, and by this point his viceroy is advising him that they must move forward quickly with their plans, but Shinzon was merely curious about Picard. They would then abduct him. They would learn that Shinzon had a genetic problem which had been created by his engineering process. This was temporal gene resequencing. Basically, he was designed to age normally up to a point, and then a secondary process was meant to be activated that would accelerate his aging unnaturally fast to a certain predetermined point, making him the same biological age as his original natural-born human counterpart, Captain Picard. Now, this process had not taken place, and Shinzon didn't wish it to. The only cure was, quite ridiculously, a full blood transfusion from the original host of the genetic material, Captain Picard. Again, I cannot cover the number of ways that is kind of stupid, but let's table that and carry on. Of course, the crew of the Enterprise are able to rescue Picard with some help, and he's able to get back. And at this point, we begin to learn what Shinzon's real plans are. He got the Romulans on his side by promising to destroy the Federation, but they don't know by what means. Particularly one, Commander Denatra, finds the approach that Shinzon was using to be appalling, and her superiors also agreed. As ruthless and as vicious and as brutal as the Romulans can be, they believe that Shinzon's actions would stain their hands for generations to come with the blood of humanity. Shinzon's simple belief was the Federation would collapse without the humanity and Earth at its core. The Federation would fracture and fall apart into anarchy and chaos, something the Romulans could take advantage of. And this single action, although would guarantee that his promise was fulfilled, the amount of blood and destruction that would be wrought was beyond the stomach of any of the Romulans. As a result of this, 2 warbirds were dispatched to try to aid the USS Enterprise and remove Shinzon from power and stop him from attacking Earth. The Thaleron weapon at the heart of his ship was capable of destruction on a global scale. Thaleron radiation is known to be able to destroy organic matter, and if deployed against a planet like Earth would render it completely uninhabitable and devoid of all life, killing everything in a matter of minutes. The weapon could charge in just 7 minutes and had the firepower and destructive capability, including the ability, revolutionary, to fire through its cloaking device to easily overwhelm whatever defenses there were at Earth. Although, again, I do question that. This is a Federation, a Starfleet that has just come out of the Dominion War. Some of the most advanced and powerful ships they've ever constructed are at their disposal. And as we saw with the return of Voyager, there are dozens of ships near to Earth. Throughout Starfleet's history, they have had a tendency to send ships a bit too far away, which again is a matter of much debate as to how illogical that is, that there were simply no ships within range of Earth. Their home base makes no sense, but again, it is extremely unlikely. As powerful as the Scimitar is, it could take on the whole of Starfleet, every orbital space station, and whatever orbital defences Earth actually has, which it must have some form of entrenched defences, whether that be shields, minefields, orbital weapons platforms, and the like, not to mention starships, fighters, and other long-range projectile weaponry that they could easily deploy against such a vessel. The Enterprise was able to give the ship a good run along with 2 warbirds. Now only imagine what 100 Starfleet ships would have been able to do, combined with any other defences within the system. That's not to mention the fact that anything that may have been able to detect it on its approach, as perfect as its cloaking device is, the vessel had to decloak and charge its weapon for 7 minutes to attack Earth. There is a flaw in this plan that I can see. That's 7 minutes of a lot of vulnerability. Now, moving on. The Enterprise would engage in battle with the Scimitar. After Picard had been rescued, trying to rendezvous with a fleet of starships, it entered into a battle but was joined again by the 2 Valdor-class warbirds under the command of Commander Dinatra. Although both these vessels will be irreparably crippled during the battle, the Enterprise would ram the Scimitar, damaging both vessels and forcing Shinzon to try to unleash his ultimate weapon, sacrificing his own life in the process by killing the object of his desire, the Echo, destroying the voice, as he would put it. Picard would take an away team, of course, aboard the Scimitar to attempt to stop this, engaging in a battle with Shinzon, to which he would ultimately be victorious, again, however unlikely that would be. And this would be, spoilers, the great tragedy and to me, what was the real death of Commander Data, when he sacrificed himself to save his captain, his crew, and possibly the whole Federation by destroying the heart of the Scimitar, its Thaleron radiation generator, which resulted in the destruction of the entire vessel. The Enterprise was saved, with the loss, of course, of many lives, including one of its senior officers, the much beloved Data. Although Data had transferred his memory engrams to B4, B4 would never live up to the expectations of Data, as his positronic matrix was not as sophisticated, although there were hints that that may have been the case. But this isn't Star Trek 3. This is Star Trek Nemesis, a much darker interpretation of the future. This film does not have all the moral messaging that a lot of the other Star Trek movies have, but it does have a fairly solid plot. It has a young Tom Hardy who I think did an excellent job mimicking much of the mannerisms and inflections of Patrick Stewart in the role and portraying a darker side of humanity. Now, all that being said, a lot of people don't like the movie. It was a very unpopular one, and for a lot of good reasons, a lot of behind the scenes issues, which we will get to in the next segment of this video. Now, as I said, Star Trek Nemesis was the bringing back together of the Next Generation crew. Of course, like I said in all my previous videos, we got all the familiar faces, so I don't really need to go into them, but it was an early outing for Tom Hardy as Shinzon of Remus, the genetic clone of Patrick Stewart's character, Captain Jean-Luc Picard. And a bit of information on that, apparently, some sources say, Tom Hardy, after the failure of this film, he saw this as the beginning of a career uplift for him. But actually it ended up being a bit of a downturn in his life, and he'd spiraled for a considerable amount of time, which is very sad to think of anyone, because of their job, having to start having suicidal thoughts, or generally having to think that they're not worth it, or that there is no other way out. And just to point that out, if you are ever feeling that way, there are helplines, there are people willing to listen to your problems. You are not alone. We've all been there and had dark times that we feel no one can help with, but there are people out there, so look for them. In addition to this person, we also have the fantastic Dina Meyer. who we all know as Diz from Starship Troopers. If we are true sci-fi fans, we all know her from that, but she's been in a variety of different other medias and is an actress I actually follow on Instagram. It's quite an interesting individual, but she has done a vast array of fascinating movies and TV series throughout her varied career. Now, in addition to her, there is also Ron Perlman, who plays the Viceroy, and who doesn't love a bit of Ron Perlman in the morning, or in the evening, afternoon, anytime really. And of course we also saw the cameo of Kate Mulgrew as Admiral Janeway. Although she is only seen on a communication screen, she's the one that gives the order for the Enterprise E to go into Romulan space. Heaven forbid something as important as a conversion with the Romulans and peace after, 200 years since the Earth-Romulan War wouldn't warrant the presence of an admiral. No, a captain of a starship, an important captain of an important ship, but still a captain. You think it would warrant someone of a little higher station and authority within the Federation. One bit of trivia I do also kind of like, I remember seeing an interview with Patrick Stewart around the time this movie was coming out. It may have been on an episode of Top Gear actually, and they were talking about the sort of little space buggy they have that they zip around the alien planet on looking for the pieces of B4. Patrick Stewart did all the driving of this vehicle himself, because of course, who wouldn't? The man's awesome. And he actually offered to have a reduced salary if they would just give him that vehicle. Don't know if that was hyperbole, and he may have just been making a joke, but I like to think, based on how crazy and bonkers that man actually is, that he was probably telling the truth. And I can kind of see it. And in hindsight, I'm pretty sure he made the right call of not getting paid. It was also, of course, the final curtain call for Brent Spiner's Commander Data. This was done because Brent Spiner had, on numerous occasions previous to this movie, stated that he would wish for his character to eventually end, as he no longer felt he could portray the youthful and immortal Commander Data, who never seemed to age, but of course, Brent Spiner, being a human like the rest of us, does, and it was impossible to keep, especially with the technology at the time, even with all the best makeup artists in the world, to make him look 20 years younger than he was, and then thinking ahead another 10 years, another 20 years, that how old would he look, and really would he want to come back to the franchise and be carrying on playing that character he started playing in 1987? Yes, apparently he would, but wouldn't have been my first choice. Don't hate Star Trek Picard, but I think I like Discovery more. Personal opinion. With that, on to the next bit. Now, in conclusion, do I feel that this film deserves a lot of the hate that it got? No, but there was a considerable amount of behind the scenes issues with this movie, particularly between the cast and the director. The director was not happy with coming onto a franchise that already had pre-established lore, characters and storyline, and wanted to do his own thing, and it shows in the movie. As I said, this film doesn't have the moral heart that a lot of other Star Trek films and series have. Even Star Trek V was at least reaching for the stars. This movie is a lot more in the vein of a more mindless sci-fi action adventure romp, and there was nothing inherently wrong with that, but it isn't really that Star Trek. Now, I don't dislike the movie. In fact, I actually rather like it, but this is a film of my generation of Star Trek, because of course I'm going to like it. And also the Scimitar is an amazing looking ship, and Shinzon I think was a fantastic villain, as were the Reman, and again Ron Perlman, awesome, and everyone brought their A game to this, except maybe the director. But it's well paced, it's structured, it has a nice beginning, middle and end, and overall is an enjoyable movie, and I don't think it really deserves all the hate that it gets, but it does get a lot of hate. Recently, in the last few years, companies like Eagle Moss have been producing some fine replica starships, again, such as the Scimitar, the Valdor-class Warbird and the Enterprise E, all from this movie, which are stunning. They are of a very high quality, which I do have somewhere, but they're not here with me right now. Everything about this film does scream, though, that there were behind-the-scenes issues. Many of the cast felt that because the core of the film was not particularly very Star Trek, it was like Star Trek, the veneer of Star Trek, someone making a film that was almost an homage to Star Trek rather than a true Star Trek movie. I don't necessarily share that opinion. If you do, fine. Maybe tell me in the comments below why you dislike this movie so much, why you feel it's not Star Trek. I feel that this was almost an early outing of a Discovery style of Star Trek, which I'm not going to criticize because every generation has their own interpretation of the franchise. I have no particular issue with Star Trek Discovery. Not a big fan of Picard, but again, I don't have to be if I don't particularly want to be. I don't dislike it, I don't hate it, but I don't like it as much as Discovery, and I don't like Discovery as much as the series that came before it. However, all the Terran Empire stuff in Discovery is bloody awesome. So, swings and roundabouts, but this feels a bit like the early incarnations of them bringing Star Trek to a more modern audience, bringing Star Trek into the 21st century. Star Trek Enterprise went so far, but Discovery has gone several steps further, and this was the movie attempt at doing the same thing. Again, it's the same thing you can say for the JJ movies. The JJ verse, say what you want about it, it got people liking Star Trek again, and if it wasn't for its production, Star Trek Discovery, Star Trek Picard, Star Trek Lower Decks, and the ones that are coming would not exist. And again, whether you love them or hate them, at least people are watching Star Trek. You're getting new Star Trek. People are talking about Star Trek. People are, they have jobs, they have work, they have lives. Whole industries are becoming available. The mechanisms of, capitalism are turning because of Star Trek once again. So it's all good. Everyone is winning, whether you like it or hate it. You've got a side, and the fact is you're talking about it again. Now, with all that said, what I think of this film overall is I think it's enjoyable. I think it is good. I do actually like that they took the Data character out at the end. I didn't see it coming when I first watched the movie, but it was a good call because, again, Brent Spiner is only human and he is going to continue to age, and Data doesn't change unless he voluntarily chooses to. He would have to alter his appearance some way. Now, again, I don't hate this film, I quite like it, but I do, again, concur that it does have only a Star Trek veneer over a loose plot. It's like they used Star Trek names, characters, and the title to make a film that was sort of juxtaposed to Star Trek rather than actually being Star Trek. So for that reason, I'm only going to give it a nerd score of 4 out of 6, which I feel I may be being generous with, because I don't think it is that much a true Star Trek movie in that sense. But on the other hand, I also don't hate it. I actually rather enjoy it more so than Star Trek V, actually, which I actually feel in many ways is more of a Star Trek movie. But with all that said, let me know in the comments below what you think of this movie. Like, share, subscribe to this channel. Please check out the rest of this playlist. I will still be doing the JJ movies, but once they come to an end, I'll move back into just doing broad topics of different movies I like to review and talk about. This channel, like my others, is meant to be a discussion, so please, in the comments below, feel free, discuss. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, thank you for watching, and bye-bye.